Not all fantastic creatures come to us from myths and legends. At one time, scientists of different times insisted, for example, that headless people really existed somewhere in Africa. It is claimed that there were even witnesses who saw them. Or, for example, people with dog heads. Or tribes that reproduced by water. When the Chinese Buddhist Hui Shen went to explore the territory of eastern China in the year 500 AD, upon his return he told several amazing stories. Hui Shen claimed to have reached a country called Fusang. In the country of Fusang, he found a kingdom of women who reproduced without men. The women, according to him, were beautiful, although their bodies were covered with hair. There was not a single man among them. In order to conceive a child, they entered the river and waited until the child was formed in their wombs. Then, after 3 or 4 months, the women would give birth to children, and they would feed them, according to Hui Shen, by giving them juice from their ears. A fictitious story indeed. But the thing is, Hui Shen was not the only witness to this event. The famous Indian astrologer Varha Mihiro claimed that he had also met these women. Now let's move to Europe. According to the Roman author Pliny the Elder, a group of people called Penote lived on an island in Scythia. These people had huge, flexible ears hanging down the sides of their heads. Their ears were so big that they didn't even need clothes, they simply examined their bodies during the day and covered themselves with them like a blanket at night. If you imagine such a picture, it looks downright stupid. However, one of Pliny's contemporaries, the Roman Pompey, stubbornly adhered to the truth and was only slightly mistaken about where they lived. According to Pompey, these mysterious Penotes inhabited the island of Orkney in what is now Scotland, and they didn't live on the island alone. They must have shared their territory with another tribe, the Gip-Adama, who had hoofed feet. The Greek historian Timagenes traveled to India as early as the 5th century BC and returned with extraordinary stories. He claimed that there was a people in the mountains called Calistria and that these people had the heads of dogs. According to him, they did not speak like people, but barked like dogs. According to him, they could understand other Indians, but responded in sign language, and there were quite a lot of them. According to Timagenes' report, there were 120,000 Calistri in the mountains of India. But the strangest thing was that his words were confirmed by other people. About 200 years after Timagenes, the traveler Spend followed the Calistri to India in search of them. He reported that the Calistri really existed, and insisted that he had seen them himself. And it was not only the Greeks who reported on this fantastic people. Chinese writers of the Tang dynasty claimed that dog-men lived in the vicinity of Tibet. Several centuries later, the traveler Marco Polo also claimed to have encountered a tribe of people similar to the Calistri on the island of Angamanan. "I assure you," wrote Marco Polo, "that all the inhabitants of this island of Angamanan have heads like the dogs of Aramaspa." Here Marco Polo was referring to another legendary people. In northern Scythia, on the snow-capped mountains called the Riphean Mountains, lived a tribe of one-eyed people called the Arima Spain. According to the ancient Greeks, these one-eyed people were not only distinguished by their strangeness. They were the main reason for the wealth of the Scythians. The Aramaspa, according to Herodotus, earned their living by stealing gold from griffins. They lived next to a group of greedy griffins who spent all their time sitting by a pile of gold. The Aramaspa were the only people who had the courage to steal it and betray it to the Scythians. Everything about this story seems fantastic. However, strangely enough, there are some modern historians who believe that the Aramaspians could have been real. According to them, all the inconsistencies in the story were the result of the language barrier. There was a group of Zoroastrians, their name was distorted in retellings and gradually turned into the word Aramaspa, which means one-eyed. On the other hand, Herodotus, as some historians believe, could have simply heard this name and introduced it into his story. And the Greek historian Timagenes mentioned earlier also wrote that in India he encountered not only dog-headed people. He claimed to have met a group of extremely strange people called Sciapodes. According to him, the people of this tribe had only one leg with one giant foot, and when it became hot, they lay on their backs and protected themselves from the sun under the shade of their own foot. According to Timogenes, the sciapodes moved by jumping and were good at it. They could use their single leg to jump over a person's head. Isidore of Seville insisted on their existence and depicted them in his bestiary. Early maps show small silhouettes of sciapods in the areas of India where they were believed to live. An explorer Migosfin claimed that during his travels in India, the strangest people he met were the Astams. They were a tribe of incredibly hairy people dressed in cotton wool and had no mouth. According to Migosfin, the Astams fed by smell. They foraged for roots and flowers and fed on their smell. Medieval explorers claimed to have encountered the Astams and specifically mentioned that they lived in the upper reaches of the Ganges. John Mandeville wrote the most about them. According to Mandeville, they were dwarfs. Their face was almost hollow, with a hole in the middle through which they sucked water through a straw. Since they had no mouth, they had to communicate by hissing. And during his campaign, Alexander the Great reached the Himalayas, a land where people allegedly lived whose legs were turned backwards. However, strangely enough, this did not cause them discomfort. They could run quickly and kept up with the fastest animals. Alexander the Great wanted to bring one of these creatures to Greece, but their lungs were designed in such a way that they could not breathe in a different climate and began to suffocate in the thick air of the lowlands. Migosfin, mentioned earlier, also claimed to have seen them when he traveled to India. He said that they preferred to be called Null Mustache, and added that they had 8 toes on each foot. And another legendary ancient creature is the Libyan satyrs, who, according to many Roman and Greek writers, existed not only in myths. They were real, and many claimed to have seen them in person. Greek writers Herodotus and Xenophon claimed to have seen the skin of a satyr. They said it was displayed as a tourist attraction in a city on the Meander, and they were not the only ones to claim this. Pliny the Elder mentions in his writings that several satyrs lived in western Ethiopia. Pausanias wrote that a Libyan satyr was captured and brought to Rome, and Plutarch claimed to have seen a satyr captured in what is now Albania. The last satyrs are believed to have died only in the 4th century AD, but their bodies could be seen for a long time. Saint Jerome said that he personally saw the body of a satyr preserved in a pile of salt. What do you think about this, dear viewers? Leave your opinion in the comments.